Well, heading into summer, when you think seafood, lobster is probably what comes to mind first, especially with some of those delicious spots here on the Connecticut shoreline.
Lobstering used to be big business in the Long Island Sound, but in the last 20 years, its population here has nearly vanished. Could we soon be looking at our last local lobster? Meteorologist Ryan Breton explores why the lobsters are fleeing and how it's hurting the once thriving industry.
Well, let's see. I've been lobstering before I was driving. As I give you, and I'm 66, so it's quite a few years.
For Michael Grimshaw, living and working on the Sound out of Stonington is a way of life.
It's been a good life for the most part.
These days, the Lady Lynn is spending more time in port, between the record price of diesel and no guarantee they'll break even with their catch.
I never foreseen this happening to this extent. I'm shocked, to say the least, and I've tried all my tricks.
Commercial lobster landings peaked in Connecticut in 1998, more than 3.7 million pounds.
Around 1998, there were anecdotal reports of decreases in the lobster catch. By 1999, it was pretty dramatic that there had been a fall off.
Now it's collapsed to only about 150,000 pounds landed in 2020.
It's a 97% drop.
Peter Hearn, executive director for the Council of Environmental Quality, says some first believed mosquito pesticides used on both sides of the Sound to combat West Nile virus in the late 90s were to blame.
It was theorized that perhaps the pesticides also killed off the lobster or stressed the lobster so that they couldn't survive.
In the years since, researchers have not found pesticides in the remaining lobster, leaving one other factor as a big reason for the decline.
For years, we've been measuring the temperature of the Sound.
The water in and around the Sound warming up.
The Gulf Stream out here is what they had off the Carolinas years ago. So I got to believe it, and it's definitely got an effect on what's going on to the lobster population, even the fish migration.
Fish that prefer cooler water are fleeing the Sound, while those that prefer warmer water are finding their way here.
In 1970, typical bottom temperatures on average for the year, 46 degrees. By 2020, we're looking at 59 degrees as an average bottom temperature. And certainly in the summer, that temperature spikes.
For many weeks of the summer, the water now warms well above 68 degrees, which is known as the upper limit for lobster.
The major probability of the decline in lobster is due to water temperature in the Sound. And that water temperature can be stressing the lobsters and causing their greater susceptibility to diseases that normally they might resist.
Let her go.
The warmer the water, the tougher survival becomes.
They can't get the oxygen out of the water, and they suffocate, basically.
Down the road in Noank, Abbott's Lobster in the Rough is celebrating its 75th season, and in those 7 decades, a lot has changed.
When Abbott's first opened as a lobster pound, there was a conveyor belt that went right from our dock into the pound.
Now the conveyor belt only brings fresh seawater, most of the lobster coming from Maine and Canada.
That just gives you an idea of how many lobsters, hundreds of pounds of lobsters that they were bringing in right here on this dock daily, which is certainly not the case anymore.
Adding to the struggles today, the price of everything.
The cost is going to send us right out of business, between the cost of bait and the cost of fuel and the cost of everything you use in the lobster industry.
Lobster prices are just outrageous right now. Some of the things that we're seeing and what we should be charging, I would just be embarrassed to put out there.
Back in Stonington, the question is, how long until it doesn't make sense to lobster here?
I still do this for my son. I keep him busy in that, but really,
what's the future for him?
I don't think there is any.
The reality of a changing, warming climate.
It's already part of the equation, whether we like it or not. For a while, we got around it, but it's definitely affected this industry out here.
Another problem, fish that typically live off the mid-Atlantic are making their way to the Sound in increasing numbers. And those fish feed off juvenile lobster. So even the few surviving warm waters are facing an added challenge. I'm meteorologist Ryan Breton, Fox 61 News.